My stepmom banned me from my dad's will reading, but I had the real will. You should have seen her face when the truth came out. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Hannah Carter, 27 years old, a nurse from Ohio. My dad, Thomas Carter, raised me alone after my mom passed away when I was a kid. He was my best friend, my biggest supporter, and the kind of man who worked hard and loved even harder. For years, it was just the two of us. Life was simple and peaceful. When I was in college, Dad met a woman named Veronica. She was beautiful, elegant, and full of charm. She worked in real estate and always dressed like she was heading to a photo shoot. At first, I was happy for my dad. He had been alone for a long time, and I wanted him to have someone. But soon after they got married, things started to change. Veronica was friendly on the surface, but something about her felt off. She'd smile at me when my dad was around, but give me cold, sharp looks when he wasn't. It started small. She'd make comments about how grown women shouldn't be so attached to their fathers, or how Thomas deserves peace, not constant reminders of the past. I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to make my dad choose between us. Over time, she found ways to keep me away. When I visited, she'd tell me Dad was resting or not feeling well. When I called, she'd pick up and say he was asleep or too tired to talk. At first, I believed her, but it started happening too often. Dad began to sound distant too. I could tell he was being pressured. He'd say things like, "You know how Veronica worries about my health," or "Let's not argue, sweetheart." It broke my heart. Then Dad got sick. Really sick. He was in and out of the hospital, and Veronica made it clear that she was in charge. She told the doctors she was his sole decision-maker and limited my visits, saying it was for his comfort. I felt helpless watching from the outside. Every time I tried to step in, she shut me down. When my dad passed away, my world fell apart. I showed up at the funeral hoping for closure, but even there, Veronica took control of everything. The arrangements, the speeches, the people allowed to attend. I stood in the back, crying quietly, while she stood in front acting like the perfect grieving widow. A few days later, I heard from a family friend that the will reading was happening soon. I waited for an invitation that never came. When I asked Veronica, she said flatly, "You're not part of this, Hannah. It's family only." That's when I realized she had completely cut me out of my father's life, and maybe even his legacy. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My dad wasn't a man who would leave me with nothing. He had promised, more than once, that he'd always take care of me. And I was about to find out just how true that promise really was. After the funeral, things got even worse. Veronica started talking to everyone my dad knew, his friends, his co-workers, even some of our relatives, and twisted every story to make me look like a selfish daughter who only cared about money. She told people I hadn't been around when Dad was sick, that I was only showing interest now because of his estate. Hearing those lies spread about me was painful, but what hurt most was knowing that some people actually believed her. Whenever I tried to reach out to clear my name, Veronica was always one step ahead. She'd already called them, crying on the phone, acting like I was harassing her. I could almost hear her fake sobs and shaky voice. I tried to be kind to Hannah, but she just won't stop fighting me. It made me sick. When Dad was still in the hospital, I did everything I could to visit. I called the nurses, I showed up at the front desk, I even brought flowers once. But every time, I was told that only Veronica was allowed in the room. She claimed the doctor ordered no visitors to reduce stress, but the hospital staff said it was her who gave those instructions. Once, I waited in the parking lot just hoping to see my dad being wheeled out for tests, but I never got that chance. Veronica made sure of it. I remember calling the hospital one evening, desperate to hear my dad's voice. A nurse answered and said, "Oh, Mrs. Carter asked that all calls be directed to her." I knew what that meant. Veronica had cut off every line of communication. My messages were never passed on, my visits never approved, and my dad never even knew I was trying to reach him. By the time the funeral came, I barely recognized my own place in my father's world. Veronica stood at the front of the room, wearing a black dress and pearls, crying into a handkerchief as she gave a long, emotional speech. She called herself the devoted wife who stood by Thomas until his last breath. Every word out of her mouth made my stomach twist. It wasn't love I heard, it was performance. She spoke like she had been the only person who truly knew him, like the years I spent with my father meant nothing. People around her nodded and comforted her. I stood quietly at the back, clutching the edge of my chair, trying not to break down in front of everyone. After the service, people walked up to Veronica to give their condolences, but almost no one approached me. The few who did looked uncomfortable, like they weren't sure what to believe anymore. I saw in their eyes that Veronica's lies had done their damage. Then, just as I was about to leave, an older man walked up to me, Mr. Jenkins, my father's longtime lawyer and friend. He didn't say much, just placed a hand on my shoulder and gave me a small nod. There was kindness in his eyes, the kind that said he knew more than he could say out loud. In that silent moment, I felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, not everyone had been fooled by Veronica's act. A week after the funeral, the will reading was scheduled. I didn't get any details about it, not even a call. I found out only because one of Dad's old neighbors mentioned it in passing, saying she had seen Veronica meeting with the lawyer downtown. I called Veronica to ask about it, trying to keep my voice calm, but she didn't even pretend to be polite. She said, "You're not part of this anymore, Hannah. It's family business." Then she hung up before I could reply. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Not part of this anymore. I sat on my couch, holding the phone in my hand, staring at the floor. I was my father's only child. How could I not be part of this? The silence in the apartment felt unbearable. It was like she had erased me from his life completely, from his memories, his home, even his final moments. A few days later, gossip started spreading around town. People whispered that Dad had left everything to Veronica, the house, the savings, even his small auto shop. Someone even said Veronica was planning to sell the house I grew up in. I couldn't believe it. That house was more than a property. It held every memory of me and Dad. From the old porch swing we built together to the wall where he measured my height every birthday. It was our life. Still, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about how things had unfolded just didn't make sense. My father wasn't careless or forgetful. He had always been fair and deliberate about everything, especially when it came to me. I remembered how he used to say, "If anything ever happens to me, you'll be okay, sweetheart." I've made sure of that. Those words echoed in my head again and again. Then, one quiet night, I was sitting at my desk, going through some papers, when I saw my old purse from the hospital visits. It had been sitting in my closet untouched for months. For some reason, I decided to open it. That's when I found it, a small, sealed envelope tucked deep inside one of the inner pockets. My heart started to pound. I instantly recognized my dad's handwriting on the front. It said simply, "For Hannah. Keep this safe." I froze. I remembered the exact moment he gave it to me. It was the last day I saw him before he was admitted to the hospital. We were sitting in his car, and he looked tired but calm. He had slipped the envelope into my purse and said softly, "Keep this safe, Hannah. One day you'll understand." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was one of his little notes, or maybe some old photos. But sitting there now, the memory felt different, heavier, more urgent. I carefully turned the envelope in my hands. It was still sealed, and I could feel something thick inside, like folded papers. My fingers trembled. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt since his death. Hope. Maybe this was why things had felt so wrong. Maybe Dad had known something. Maybe he had tried to warn me in the only way he could. My hands shook as I held the envelope. I didn't know whether to open it or call someone first. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at my father's handwriting. It was dated exactly 1 week before he was taken to the hospital. I could feel my chest tightening as I carefully tore it open. Inside were 2 things, a folded handwritten letter and another envelope with an official-looking seal. I unfolded the letter first. It was written in my dad's usual neat handwriting, though a little shakier than usual. As I started to read, my eyes filled with tears. "Hannah," it began, "if you're reading this, something must have happened to me. Veronica has been pushing me to change everything. The will, the house, even my medical papers. I don't trust her anymore. She's been acting strange, keeping you away and making decisions I never agreed to. This is my final wish, Hannah. Please take the sealed document and give it to Mr. Jenkins. He will know what to do. You are my daughter, and everything I've worked for is meant for you. Don't let her take that from you." I covered my mouth with my hand as I read those words over and over. My father had known. He had felt what I was feeling. He saw the manipulation long before I did, and he still tried to protect me, even when he was sick and dying. The realization hit me so hard I couldn't stop crying. When I finally managed to breathe again, I reached for the second envelope, the one with the seal. It had the stamp of a law office and a signature that looked like Mr. Jenkins's. I didn't open it right away. I knew this had to be the real will, the one my stepmother had worked so hard to bury. My dad had hidden it with me because he trusted that I would find it when the time was right. I pressed the letter to my chest, whispering, "You knew, didn't you, Dad? You always knew." For the first time in a long while, I felt like he was still guiding me, even from beyond the grave. Without wasting another second, I grabbed my car keys. It didn't matter that it was late. I needed to see Mr. Jenkins right away. I drove through the empty streets, clutching the envelope in one hand like it was my lifeline. My mind was racing the entire time, every word of my dad's letter replaying in my head. When I finally reached Mr. Jenkins's office, the lights were still on. He often stayed late, and that night, it felt like fate. I ran up the steps and knocked on his door. He looked surprised to see me, but when he saw the envelope in my hand, his expression changed. I could tell he already suspected what it was. "I think my dad left this for me," I said, my voice breaking. "He said to give it to you if something happened." Mr. Jenkins took the envelope gently from my hands, his face turning serious. He motioned for me to sit down, and in that moment, I knew my life was about to change forever. Mr. Jenkins carefully opened the sealed envelope while I sat across from him, my hands clenched in my lap. He took his time, reading every page slowly, his expression changing from surprise to disbelief. After several minutes, he looked up at me, his voice calm but serious. "Hannah, this is your father's real will," he said. "It's signed, notarized, and dated a week before his final hospitalization. This is the most recent legal document." I felt a wave of emotion rush over me. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. "So, everything Veronica said about me being cut off was a lie?" I asked quietly. Mr. Jenkins nodded. "Yes. According to this will, your father left you the house, his savings, and his business shares. Veronica was only supposed to receive a small monthly allowance. She must have found an older version of the will and pretended it was the final one." Hearing that made my stomach twist. I couldn't believe Veronica had gone that far. She had stood at his funeral pretending to be the heartbroken widow, all while hiding the truth. "She destroyed the new one, didn't she?" I said. Jenkins sighed. "That's what I suspect. She likely found this version in your father's things before he could file it with me. But your father was smart. He gave you a sealed copy, probably knowing she might try something like this. The notary's stamp and signatures are all legitimate. This will is legally binding." I sat back, stunned. My dad had planned for everything. He must have sensed how far Veronica would go once he was gone. The thought broke my heart and comforted me at the same time. Mr. Jenkins leaned forward and said softly, "Hannah, I need you to understand something. Once we file this in court, things are going to get ugly. Veronica won't take this lightly. She'll accuse you of lying, of forging documents, anything to protect herself. Are you ready for that?" I took a deep breath and nodded. "She's already taken everything from me, my father, my home, my peace. I'm not letting her take his legacy too." He gave me a reassuring nod and started gathering the papers. "Then we'll begin immediately. I'll file a motion to contest the will and submit this as the authentic version. It will go to probate court, and from there, the truth will come out." We spent the next hour filling out paperwork. I signed several documents, each one bringing me a little closer to justice. Mr. Jenkins made copies of the letter and the will, sealing the originals back in an envelope for safekeeping. Before I left, he handed me a copy of my father's letter. "Keep this close," he said. "It's proof not just of the will, but of his intent." As I walked out of his office that night, I felt a strange mix of grief and determination. The pain of losing my father hadn't faded, but now I had something I hadn't had in weeks, a sense of direction. My dad had trusted me to finish what he started, and I was ready to fight for him, no matter how ugly it got. The day of the official will reading finally came. It was held at a law office downtown, the same one Veronica had arranged weeks ago without telling me. Mr. Jenkins told me to come with him, assuring me that this was the moment the truth would finally come to light. My heart pounded the entire drive there. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I had to face her. When we walked into the conference room, Veronica was already there, sitting at the head of the table. She was dressed in an expensive black outfit, her hair perfectly styled, a smug smile on her face. Around her were a few people, her lawyer, some of my dad's business associates, and a couple of family friends. The air felt heavy. As soon as Veronica saw me, her smile vanished. "You weren't invited," she said coldly, crossing her arms. I looked her straight in the eye and said calmly, "You might want to hear this, Veronica." Her lawyer shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Veronica glared at Mr. Jenkins and said sharply, "I don't see why she's here. The will has already been read privately." Mr. Jenkins placed his briefcase on the table and said in his steady voice, "Actually, there's been a development. Thomas Carter's most recent will has come to light, and as his appointed legal representative, I'm here to present it." The room went silent. Veronica's face twitched, but she tried to laugh it off. "That's ridiculous. My husband updated his will months before he died. I was there." Mr. Jenkins ignored her comment and opened a folder, pulling out the sealed envelope with the notary's stamp still intact. "This document," he said, "is dated 1 week before Mr. Carter's hospitalization. It was sealed, notarized, and verified by 2 witnesses. It overrides any previous versions." Veronica's expression changed instantly. Her confident smile disappeared, replaced by a nervous twitch around her mouth. "That can't be," she muttered. "That's not possible." Mr. Jenkins handed copies to the room. I could hear the soft rustling of papers as everyone started reading. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Veronica's lawyer looked uneasy. Finally, Mr. Jenkins read aloud the key section. The part where my father clearly stated that the house, his savings, and his business shares were left entirely to me, while Veronica was to receive only a small monthly allowance. I watched Veronica's face as the words sank in. The color drained from her cheeks. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "No," she said softly at first, then louder. "This is fake. She forged this. She's trying to steal what's mine." Mr. Jenkins stayed calm. "Mrs. Carter, the signatures and notary seals have been verified. This document is authentic. Any claim otherwise will be handled in court." The room stayed silent. No one looked at her. Even the lawyer sitting next to her seemed embarrassed. Veronica's breathing grew heavy, and her voice cracked as she shouted, "He promised me everything." I didn't respond. I just sat quietly, clutching my father's letter inside my bag. Watching her unravel wasn't satisfying, it was sad. But in that moment, the truth finally stood on its own, and my father's voice, through his words and will, had spoken louder than her lies ever could. The silence in the room didn't last long. As soon as Mr. Jenkins finished reading, Veronica slammed her hand on the table and shouted, "This is a lie. She forged it. That girl has always been after his money." Her voice echoed off the walls, but no one said a word. Everyone just stared at her. I didn't respond. I just sat still, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Mr. Jenkins stayed calm, as if he had expected this reaction. He said in a measured tone, "Mrs. Carter, this document has already been verified. The signatures match Thomas Carter's official records, and the notary's stamp has been confirmed as genuine. If you wish to dispute it, we can proceed through court channels." Veronica's face turned red. "You're lying. You're all lying," she screamed, turning to her lawyer for support, but he looked uncomfortable, flipping through the papers as if searching for a way out. "This can't be happening," she muttered, pacing around the room. "I gave that man everything. I took care of him when no one else would. And this is how he repays me." Her outburst filled the room with tension. A few of my father's business partners exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Mr. Clark, finally spoke up. "Veronica, I was one of the witnesses. I saw Thomas sign that document. He told me this was his final decision." She froze, staring at him like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. "You," she whispered, her voice shaking. Mr. Clark nodded slowly. "He wanted to make sure Hannah would be protected. He said you were pressuring him." Veronica's breathing grew heavy, and she turned back toward Mr. Jenkins. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Both of you." Then she glared at me. "You think this makes you special? You stole everything from me." I finally spoke, keeping my voice steady. "No, Veronica. You tried to steal what wasn't yours." Her eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Mr. Jenkins spoke firmly. "Mrs. Carter, this discussion is over. The court will handle the rest." Veronica grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the papers on the table fluttered. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I hadn't realized how tense my body had been until that moment. Mr. Jenkins took a deep breath and looked around the table. "We'll be submitting the document officially to the probate court," he said. The estate will be frozen until the legal review is completed. But based on the evidence, the outcome is clear. I nodded, still trying to process everything. It wasn't over yet, but the hardest part was behind me. The truth was out, and Veronica's mask had finally cracked in front of everyone. As I left the office that day, I saw her car speeding out of the parking lot, tires screeching. She didn't even look back. For the first time since my father's death, I felt like the balance had shifted. My dad's voice had been silenced by her lies, but now his truth was speaking through every word on that paper. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of her downfall. A few days later, I went back to Mr. Jenkins's office. I thought everything was already done, but he said quietly, "There's something your father wanted you to have." He reached into a drawer and took out a small flash drive sealed in a labeled envelope. My father's handwriting was on it. Seeing his writing again made my chest tighten. "He left this with me the same day he signed the new will," Jenkins explained. "He said it was only to be given to you if things went wrong." My hands trembled as I took it. "What's on it?" I asked softly. Jenkins looked at me with a faint, knowing smile. "It's best if you see for yourself." He plugged the drive into his computer and turned the screen toward me. A video opened. My father appeared on the screen, sitting in his office, wearing his usual gray sweater. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. My breath caught when he spoke. "If you're watching this, it means Veronica went too far," he said, his voice steady but sad. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I tried to handle things quietly, but she wouldn't stop. Everything I built, our home, the company, all of it, was always meant for you." He paused for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You've always been the one with my heart, Hannah. Don't let her make you doubt that. I trust Mr. Jenkins to guide you. Stay strong, my girl." The video ended, leaving the room silent except for the faint hum of the computer. I covered my mouth with my hand as tears ran down my cheeks. It felt like he was right there with me again, giving me strength. Jenkins gently handed me a tissue. "This," he said, "is the final piece we needed." The next day, he submitted the video to the court as official evidence. The reaction was immediate. The judge ordered a full review, and the video's authenticity was confirmed by digital forensics. My father's signature, voice, and even the date on the video matched perfectly with the will documents. When Veronica's lawyer saw the footage, he looked defeated. By the end of the week, he formally withdrew from her case. Without legal support, and with the evidence stacked against her, Veronica had no defense left. Soon after, she was served with notices for fraud and obstruction of justice. I didn't attend the hearing that followed. Jenkins called to tell me the outcome. The court recognized my father's final will as valid and binding. Everything he left behind was now legally mine. When I hung up the phone, I sat quietly by the window of my apartment. The city outside looked brighter somehow. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't about the money or the house. It was about truth. My father had trusted me to carry his final wish, and I had done it. The lies, the pain, the betrayal, all of it was over now. And somewhere deep inside, I knew he would be proud. When the final hearing came, the courtroom felt tense but calm. I sat quietly beside Mr. Jenkins while Veronica stood across the room with a different lawyer, her face pale and drawn. The judge reviewed the evidence one last time. The video, the notarized will, and the signatures. Everything matched perfectly. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "The court finds the later will valid. The estate of Thomas Carter shall be distributed according to this document." For a second, I didn't even breathe. The words sank in slowly. My father's wishes were finally honored. The house, his savings, and the company shares were all restored under my name. Veronica was left with nothing but her personal items and the small annuity my father had originally intended for her. She didn't look at me as the decision was read. Her expression was empty, her pride completely shattered. When the judge adjourned, she walked out without saying a word. I didn't feel joy in watching her fall. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. The sky was overcast, but I felt light for the first time in months. Mr. Jenkins placed a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Your father would be proud of you, Hannah. You carried his truth all the way." I nodded, trying to smile through the tears forming in my eyes. "Thank you for standing by me," I whispered. A few days later, I drove to the cemetery. The trees were just beginning to turn with autumn colors, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I walked slowly to my father's grave, holding the letter he wrote and one of our old photos. the one of us fishing by the lake when I was 10. He had his arm around me, smiling proudly at the camera. I knelt down and brushed the leaves off his headstone. "You were right, Dad," I whispered softly. "Truth always finds its way home." My voice cracked a little, but I felt a warmth in my chest, like he was there listening. I placed the letter and the photo beside the grave, letting my fingers linger on the cold stone for a moment. All the anger, confusion, and pain I'd carried for so long seemed to fade away. There was only peace now, quiet and real. When I stood up, the wind blew gently through the trees, and I smiled through my tears. My father's words echoed in my heart, "Stay strong, my girl." Walking back to my car, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like someone who had kept a promise, who had protected what truly mattered. The betrayal was behind me, and the truth had finally been seen. As I started the engine and drove away, I glanced once more in the rearview mirror toward his resting place. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Months passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. I moved back into my father's house, the place that had once felt stolen from me. Walking through the rooms, I could still feel his presence, the smell of his aftershave lingering in the hallway, his favorite chair by the window, the faint sound of his old jazz records in my mind. The first thing I did was restore the house. I painted the walls, fixed the garden, and brought back the warmth it once had. But one room I couldn't touch, my father's workshop. I kept it exactly as it was. His tools still hung neatly on the wall, and his workbench stood the same way he left it. It felt sacred, like a small piece of him still lived there. Sometimes I'd sit there quietly, listening to the soft hum of the house, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. News about Veronica came a few months later. Mr. Jenkins mentioned that she had left town after losing the case. She sold off her jewelry, tried to pay some of her debts, and then disappeared. Rumor had it she was living under a different name in another state. Her reputation was ruined. People who once admired her now avoided even mentioning her. I didn't feel any joy hearing that. I didn't want revenge anymore. I had already won, not by destroying her, but by protecting my father's legacy. He raised me to believe in doing what's right, even when it hurts. So, I decided to honor him in a way that truly mattered. I took part of the inheritance and donated it to the hospice center in town, the same place my father had once talked about supporting. I wanted to help families stay close to their loved ones in their final days, something I never got the full chance to do. When I met with the hospice director and handed over the donation, I felt tears well up in my eyes. It felt like closing a painful circle, turning all the hurt into something that could heal others. The day the donation plaque was placed on the wall, it read, "In memory of Thomas Carter, a man who believed love and truth always find their way home." Seeing his name there made me proud. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a legacy that would keep touching lives long after both of us were gone. One evening, I stood on the porch as the sun set behind the trees, casting a golden glow across the yard. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the loss, and the justice that followed. My heart was no longer heavy. "My stepmother tried to erase me from my father's life," I whispered into the quiet air. "But love and truth can't be erased. Not even by greed." I smiled, feeling the breeze against my skin. The pain had turned into strength, the betrayal into peace. And I knew, wherever he was, my father was smiling too.